The Book of Samuel is the 11th episode of the 5th season of Cheers. This is, of course, directed by the wonderful James Burrows, and there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens in this episode. And I have a lot of notes, I have a lot of thoughts. They are all very, very positive. I know that is usually the case when it comes to Cheers. And why break a habit? Absolutely loved it. So I will now go through things chronologically, share some particular highlights, things that I really loved. What's worth noting is that Ted Danson is basically not in this episode. He's in it for a couple of minutes, and then Sam leaves. He's gone fishing. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And that's it. So it's a little bit strange, but it works. I wouldn't like that to be the case regularly, but for this episode, it does work. It actually starts off slightly unrelated, but we do have some focus on Woody. The episode is all about Woody. And although the intro is actually not connected to the rest of the episode, we do actually refer back to it at one point. Frasier is talking to Woody, and Frasier is basically saying a lot of stuff, and every now and then Woody will say, "I know how you feel, Dr. Crane." And then Frasier realises Woody's not listening. And Woody must say, "I know how you feel, Dr. Crane," about 4 or 5 times. I didn't count it, but it's a decent amount. And then Frasier asks for a double Scotch rocks, and Woody hears him and gets him the drink. Really fun way to start things off. We then kick in with the main narrative. Sam is in the back room in his office with Woody, Diane, and Carla, and he explains that he's going on a fishing trip, so he needs to choose somebody to be in charge of the bar while he's away. And immediately Woody, Carla, and Diane all jump up excitedly, really wanting to put their name forward. It's absolutely adorable. And then Sam, I apologise if I laugh throughout this. It's an incredibly funny episode. Heartfelt as well. There are some really moving moments, but it's also very, very funny. And Sam starts to do 1 potato, 2 potato. It doesn't work because Diane points out something that I'd never thought of before. And that's, if you do 1 potato, 2 potato with 3 people, you'll always land on the person with whom you started. And I never knew that. That's something that's worth bearing in mind if you're going to make big decisions using 1 potato, 2 potato. Sam then decides to do "My dog died last night. What colour is his blood?" And I've never heard of that one. Diane is shocked and realises this might be why Sam is as messed up as he is. But it's one of those rhymes. We used to do those a lot at school with skipping, and then you'd skip out the letters. Never ever did it with the dead dog. And then Diane finally names a colour. She names mauve. It takes a second, and then Sam realises he can't spell mauve, so he moves on very quickly. He decides to use the bat instead, where you put your hands on the bat, and whoever's hand ends up at the top is the chosen one, and Diane thinks it's her. And then Woody puts his hand on, and I quote, "the little knobbly thing at the top." Those are Diane's words. I don't know what the little knobbly thing is called either. And it's just so cute the way Woody kind of grabbed onto it. And then Carla points out that actually they get to kick the bat, and whoever kicks it out of his hand gets a chance. And Diane says, "How do we decide who kicks first?" And there is a brief pause. The comedic timing is amazing. The pause must be no more than a second, but it's perfect. And then Woody starts doing 1 potato, 2 potato, and it's just the cutest thing ever. I love their excitability. They're acting like children, but in a way that is so charming. I loved it. Sam ultimately chooses Woody because, as he says, he's the only one who hasn't irritated him in the last 5 minutes. And then off Sam goes, and that's the last we see of him for the episode. We then spend the rest of the episode in Cheers, and I just want to point out this is completely irrelevant to the narrative, but Carla is wearing the most adorable little yellow telephone earrings, and I absolutely love them. Woody gets a letter from Beth. He begins to read it out, and then it becomes very immediately apparent that this is not a happy letter. Beth reveals that she's actually found somebody else. And Frasier tries to help Woody by giving him some words of advice, and that's when Woody says, "I know just how you feel, Dr. Crane," referring, of course, to the intro scene. And then Cliff says something that I didn't love, and I think because it came out of the mouth of Cliff, we know he's not being serious, because we know he doesn't have this kind of relationship with women, or any kind of relationship with women for that matter. But yeah, I didn't love this. Cliff says, and I quote, "The best way to forget about Beth is to go out there, find some skirt, have her, use her, and throw her away." As I said, because it comes from Cliff, we kind of can assume that Cliff has never had somebody, used somebody, and then thrown them away. I don't think that's the kind of thing Cliff would do. To be quite honest, I think Cliff would cling on to that person for dear life because somebody has finally agreed to show him some kind of physical affection. But had that come from somebody else, it would have been really distasteful, but it still stood out to me as being something that was not the most pleasant to listen to. Shortly after that, though, we do get some comedy. Diane convinces Woody that it's not the way to go about things, and Diane says, and I quote, "People grow from intense suffering," which is quite profound. I completely agree. And then Carla replies, "Yeah, then how come I haven't grown an inch since I've known you?" which I absolutely loved. So we definitely have not so much of an emotional roller coaster. We don't have that many highs and lows, but there is quite a variety. We have comedy and then a little bit more raw emotion and then comedy, and I just think the balance is absolutely beautiful. Woody then hits on a woman in the bar, and then Beth and Leonard come in. Beth is played by Amanda Wyss, Leonard played by John Brace, and Leonard is Beth's new partner. She has decided to move on from Woody because the long distance just isn't working and there's no future for them, and she's found somebody else. And they begin to take pity on Woody. And Diane overhears this and steps forward and kind of comes to Woody's rescue, but what I don't understand is why she didn't pretend to be Woody's girlfriend. The only thing I can think of is that maybe, and this is speculation, this hasn't ever been shown in the episode, but maybe Woody has written letters to Beth, as we know he does, that detail Diane's relationship with Sam. And therefore Diane couldn't reasonably convince Beth that she was Woody's girlfriend. That's me kind of trying to find a reason for why she didn't do that. There's no evidence for that in the episode or in the show at all. But if I were to find a reason for why she didn't pretend to be his girlfriend, which I think would have been the easier option, I assume that that would be the logical answer. Nevertheless, Diane pretends that Woody has another girlfriend, and it goes absolutely fine until Woody suggests they could have had dinner if Beth and Leonard didn't have to catch a plane. It turns out they had time to have dinner. Woody now thinks he has to frantically find a girlfriend, otherwise he's going to have to lie about this, so he finds Sam's little black book, which is of course where the title comes from, and I rather like the fact, and it took me a second to realise what was going on. Diane gets hold of the book and turns to her name because Woody points out that she's in it, and she begins to read it out loud, and I didn't write it word for word, but it's something like Diane Chambers, the best woman I've ever been with, or something like that. And I kind of thought, oh, is this Sam revealing his true colours? And then Diane continues reading, and there's a note in there directly talking to her, because Sam clearly knew that at some point Diane would go snooping for her own name. So I rather liked that one. There's an awkward moment with a person called Tina Wilson. I feel like that bit wasn't that interesting. It lasted about 5 seconds, but it just felt a little bit random and a little bit unnecessary. And then Woody finds a woman called Desiree. And Sam has written in the book that she's the best, and there are lots of little stars. So Woody calls her up and says, "I'm a friend of Sam. Sam says you're the best, and I want to find out for myself." And I think it's very obvious there, but also not obvious. It's obvious that this isn't referring to sex. There must be something else there, but what could it be? And we get a little bit of suspense, not as much suspense as I would have liked, but I'll talk about that in a moment. Because Woody has this upcoming date with Desiree, he has to find somebody else to run the bar, and he has to choose, of course, between Diane and Carla. And as soon as Diane said they're going to make speeches, I knew exactly what Carla was going to do. Granted, I've seen this episode before, but I couldn't remember exactly what happened, but I've had a very strong suspicion that she was basically going to say no speeches, and that's exactly what she did. Really enjoyed that. And then a little while later, Woody comes into the bar, very smartly dressed, and then Desiree comes in shortly after. She's played by Katherine McGrath, and immediately it's clear to see that she looks like somebody who is not the typical person with whom Sam would go on a date. And I wish we'd kept the suspense a tiny bit longer, because Carla sees Desiree and she talks to the guys at the bar. She asks why she's here, and they say Woody's got a date with her, and then Carla says Woody's going out with Sam's cleaning lady. And I feel like we received too much information. And if I had to make a suggestion, we could have kept out the bit with the character of Tina Wilson, which, as I said, was very brief and not that interesting, and could have given ourselves that time back for a little bit more suspense. I do think we had too much information too soon, but nevertheless, it's not a big deal. And Woody also finds out very quickly, and again, I think it would have been good to keep things going a little bit longer before everybody found out the truth. Maybe it wouldn't have worked exactly as it did. It wouldn't have played out the way it did if that was the case, but I think that would have been a little bit more entertaining. But nevertheless, Desiree ends up kind of going along with it, not really sure what's going on, but she agrees to go up to dinner at Melville's with Beth and Leonard and Woody, and it's unclear how things are going to play out, but then a second later we cut to the next scene. Woody's coming down the stairs and he says that was fun, very quickly establishing that actually things seem to have gone quite well. However, Woody ultimately decides to tell Beth the truth, which I think was the right thing to do. And he does. He's honest with her. We have a really well-written, really nice exchange between the two of them. She gives him a kiss on the cheek, and I think it's really nice closure for Woody. Because I think had she just written a letter and said, I've moved on, I've found somebody else, I think that would have been harder to eventually get over this. But by giving him this closure, this opportunity to kind of put everything together nicely and say a proper goodbye to Beth and talk about his feelings a little bit, I think was a really positive way of doing things. And actually we end in a really beautiful way. It's a little bit awkward for a moment because Desiree overhears the others, not Woody, but the others being quite impolite about the fact that she's a cleaner. But then Woody stops her from leaving Cheers and says, actually, I enjoyed spending time with you. And he says to her, and I think revealing this vulnerability is really important for helping anybody else in a similar situation to Woody to realise that it's okay to be in this position. Woody explains to Desiree, I need somebody to talk to. And I think admitting that is a really great thing. Admitting that actually things are getting on top of him. He doesn't really know how to feel about the situation. He does need to talk it out with somebody is really powerful, and I think well done to Woody. And then off they go and have coffee, and it's a nice way to end things. So it's a really great episode. Very, very funny on a lot of occasions, but also with some very moving, a lot more heartfelt moments as well. Definitely a little strange not having Sam in this very much, but as an occasional thing, it worked well. It worked well enough. So I don't mind that too much. Ultimately, it's a decent episode. The Book of Samuel is very balanced, very entertaining, very meaningful, and definitely very enjoyable.